October the 15th, 1942. 4 in the morning. The mold shop cellar under the Stalingrad Tractor Factory shook every 17 seconds under German 150mm shells. Ivan Gromov lay beside the observation slit with a notebook on a brick and counted new ice forming on the Volga under the flashes. His job was to mark where a boat might catch, where the current still ran black, and where the German guns had shifted since dusk. It was useful work and thankless work. Every line he wrote might save a crossing later. Every blast buried the slit a little deeper and forced him to dig it open again with fingers already stiff from cold. One shell landed so close it drove part of the east wall into the cellar. Ivan lost the notebook, swallowed dust, and found himself on his side in broken brick and machine grit. Under his hand was something hard and smooth. He pulled out half a gramophone record, cracked clean through, black except for a crescent of mud over the label. Swan Lake. The paper sleeve was still there. On the corner, in blue pencil, someone had written an address. Volzhsky Street, 14. Katya. In the cellar, men scavenged string from rags and candle ends from dead pockets. A half record had no value, a quartermaster could count. That was why Ivan kept looking at it. It belonged to a room with walls, a shelf, and a woman who expected mail to find her. He wrapped it in a strip of oily cloth and slid it inside his greatcoat. The gain was nothing he could explain. The cost was immediate. A scout carrying a fragile object moved more carefully than a scout should. The duty commander, Sergeant Leonty Savchenko, crawled in a little later with a runner and a message from the river. A boat would cross from the east bank that night to Berth 62, perhaps the last one before the ice closed that stretch of the Volga. The berth still functioned, but the final 200 meters to it were under German sniper fire from the upper floors of the Red October workers' housing. 7 stretcher-bearers had died there in 3 days. The crossing list had one space still locked in reserve by an old boatman named Pavel Makarov. He would not release it because he believed his daughter, Katya, might still reach the ramp from the west bank. If she was alive, the place was hers. If she was dead, he wanted the truth from a man who had seen it. There were 11 badly wounded men in the cellar. 1 breathed through bandages where his jaw had been. 1 had both thighs splintered with mold frames. Alyosha, 18, lay with a frozen dressing over his belly and kept waking just long enough to ask whether it was night yet. Savchenko did not need to add anything. A berth existed. 11 men needed it. A missing woman stood between them and the river. Ivan took the sleeve from his coat and laid it on a crate. Volzhsky Street, 14. Katya. He said he knew the district from before the war, when he had carried supply papers through that side of the city for the factory. He could reach Berth 62. He could show Makarov the sleeve. If the boatman wanted proof, Ivan could go on to the address and find either the woman or the truth that had replaced her. He did not make a speech about duty. He said a dead civilian could not use a boat. By saying it aloud, he turned a private impulse into public business, and if he failed, everybody on the cellar floor would know what the failure had cost. Savchenko asked him why he cared about a stranger's record in the middle of Stalingrad. Ivan said he cared about the berth. That was only part of it, but it was the useful part. Men had been carrying small promises through this city since August. A key, a photograph, a letter folded into cloth, whatever was found in a dead pocket and could still point to an address. Most of those promises never arrived. Still, men made them because they wanted one thing in the city to be delivered instead of destroyed. Savchenko thought for a long time, then gave the sleeve back. Ivan would go alone, no escort, no reserve. If he reached the berth and got terms, he was to return at once. If he vanished, the seller would assume the place on the boat had vanished with him. That was the only bargain the living could afford. Ivan stripped his load down to what he could fight and crawl with. Rifle, grenade, dressing, entrenching spade, water bottle, the wrapped half record, the sleeve. He greased the one brass button still showing on his coat and pulled the spoon off his mess tin so it would not clink. He mapped the route in his head, out through the side bay, down into Banny Ravine, along the shell-cut drain line toward the retaining wall near Berth 62, 600 meters, most of it on his elbows. The ravine gave concealment. It also collected the men who had failed before him. He left at 17:20 under smoke the color of old tin. The shelling had shifted south, which meant some other group of men had become more important targets for the hour. Ivan slid into Banny Ravine and started forward. Every 20 meters he stopped for 30 seconds and listened. He had learned long ago that hurry deafened a man faster than gunfire. The ravine smelled of mud, cordite, horse rot, and open bodies. A dead German lay across a drainage pipe, with one gloved hand still hooked through a magazine pouch. A Soviet sapper had frozen around a coil of wire. A horse blocked one bend completely, and Ivan had to crawl over the hard curve of its flank and down through a shell wound in its side. The method kept him alive and cost him time. In Stalingrad, time was one more ration item, and he was spending it too quickly. A flare rose over the workers' housing and turned the ravine white. Ivan buried himself in a pile of bodies and mud. His cheek touched a dead German's frozen temple. The eye was open, crusted with frost. He did not move until the flare went out. Halfway down the ravine, a shot punched through his water bottle. Warm water burst over his sleeve and turned to white vapor in the air. Ivan stayed still. A hit in the body would have been simpler. This shot meant a man somewhere had seen movement, taken the range, and chosen to correct before he killed. Through a gap between broken boiler plates, Ivan found the dark square of a third-floor window in housing block 6. He eased the wrapped record out of his coat and slid it beneath a dead Soviet's tunic, then crawled 2 bodies to the right before moving again. The gain was a freer chest and less chance of crushing the disc. The cost was worse than weight. For a minute, he was no longer carrying the one thing that made his journey more than another crawl through filth. No second shot came at once. That told him the sniper was watching patterns rather than places. Ivan backed half a meter, recovered the record, and shifted his movement to where a man who had not been thinking would not go. The trick worked once, which was all he needed. He cleared the last bend of the ravine with his water gone, 2 fingers numb, and the certainty that the open ground to the berth would be worse. The final stretch looked like a stripped parade square. Broken planks, smashed stretchers, and bodies darkening under new frost. Beyond it, the Volga was skinning over in thin plates that clicked against the mooring posts. Flares rose every 3 minutes. Ivan watched from the dirt lip and counted. On 2 flares, no shot. On the next, 1 shot 4 seconds after full light. On the next, the same. That was discipline or habit. It was enough. He bound the wrapped record inside his trouser leg and waited for the next flare. When it rose, he ran on the count of 3 instead of 4. The first shot struck the ice a meter to his right. The second punched through the heel of his boot and burned along the edge of his foot. He nearly fell, stayed up, and kept going because a man upright is complicated. But a man on the ice is a solved problem. The third shot did not come. Ivan hit the retaining wall, slid down old ice and tar, and dropped into the berth shelter hard enough to knock a cigarette from the mouth of the man crouching there. Pavel Makarov was older than Ivan expected, a riverman with rope-burned hands and a face pared down by cold and lack of sleep. He swore first, then saw the scout's field glasses, the torn boot, and the oilcloth package. Ivan put the sleeve on the crate between them and said Katya. Makarov read the address once, then again, touching the blue pencil letters with the side of one thumb. He did not break. Men on the Volga had run out of room for dramatic grief. He simply motioned Ivan deeper into the shelter, so the wind would not steal the lantern flame. The gain was attention. The cost was that Ivan had stepped inside another man's private accounting. Makarov explained the berth with the same flat accuracy he might have used for current speed. Katya had worked the crossings before the siege, first selling tickets, later keeping lists when everyone younger and male had gone into uniform or the river. Since September, whenever he could, he had held one place open against sense and regulation, not because he thought the state would notice. Because if his daughter came in, burned, shot, or half-frozen from the West Bank, he wanted one space on one boat that had not already been bought by rank, panic, or luck. She had vanished a month earlier while fetching water inland. Shell, sniper, cellar collapse, patrol. In Stalingrad, the cause of a disappearance was often a choice of vocabulary. Until he knew which, the berth stayed reserved. Ivan asked for terms. Makarov gave them at once if Katya lived. Ivan was to leave the record with her and bring back any sign she had been reached. If she was dead, Ivan was to come back and say it from his own mouth. Only then would the place be released to one of the factory wounded. Ivan had until dawn on the 18th. After that, the ice or the Germans would close the account for both of them. Ivan accepted, before his reason finished objecting. The terms were absurd, in the way most wartime terms are absurd. 1 scout, 1 broken record, 1 vanished address, and 11 wounded men waiting in a cellar for the result. Yet absurdity did not make the arrangement unreal. It made it exact. Until that moment, the city had still allowed him to pretend he was only carrying a found object and taking advantage of a coincidence. Makarov's conditions stripped away that comfort. Now the mission had a shape that could be failed. He would either return with a living woman, return with a death, or not return at all. In the first case, 1 berth would be lost to the cellar. In the second, it would be 1. In the third, the men underground would wait on a hope that had already gone cold. Ivan understood that he had not merely been given directions. He had been made the narrow point through which several other lives would have to pass. The route inland was worse than the run to the berth. The direct streets were cut by fire or gone altogether. Ivan had to follow the retaining wall north, then slip through the backs of the workers' flats, where enough masonry still stood to cast shadows. Volzhsky Street no longer existed as a true street. It was a line of remembered addresses hanging over heaps of brick. Number 14 had once been a corner building with a grocer's shop below and apartments above. If any sign remained, it would be a section of courtyard wall, a mailbox frame, or the angle of a stair. Makarov said numbers outlived people in a city like this. It sounded like something the river had taught him. Ivan moved into the apartment district after full dark. The civilian blocks felt more intimate than the factories, and therefore more damaged. He passed a child's bed frame hanging out of a wall, a piano keyboard spilled down a stair with no upper floor, a samovar set under new snow because someone had once used it as cover and then forgotten it. He navigated by absences as much as by remains. Where the wind ran unchecked, a building had stood. Where the rubble changed from domestic brick to scorched pipe and slag, a boiler room or bakery had been. His feet found Volzhsky Street before his eyes did, because he had ridden this way in summer with inventory papers in his satchel. Memory gave him a line through the dark. It also made the dark more exact. Number 12 was a smoking heap of beams. Number 16 was only a facade with 3 empty windows and moonlight behind them. Between them lay the place where 14 should have been. A single wall remained, a short flight of stairs, and a courtyard gate on one hinge. At the foot of the wall, a small fire glowed inside a metal can. Beside it sat an old woman wrapped in quilts and a soldier's coat, turned inside out for warmth. Ivan stopped 3 paces away and asked for Katya. She lifted her head, took the sleeve and the half record, and read the blue pencil in the firelight. Then she told him Katya was dead. A month ago, perhaps more. shot in the neck while carrying water back from the river. Neighbors and a militiaman dragged her in. They buried her in the cellar until the cellar roof came down later. That was all. The journey had reached its answer, and the answer was smaller and heavier than Ivan had imagined. The woman said her name was Anna Petrovna. Mother by blood or by shared kitchen made no practical difference anymore. Ivan held out the half record. He had brought it across the city and had no script for the moment after delivery. Anna studied the broken arc and handed it back. "Keep it," she said. Katya liked that one. The sentence changed the object completely. It was no longer a thing to be delivered. It was proof that a woman now dead had once had evenings, shelves, preferences, and enough quiet in her life to choose a piece of music. Ivan put it back inside his coat. The gain was certainty. The cost was the last of his useful hope. He had not saved anyone by reaching the address. He had only obtained the truth required to save somebody else. For a minute he stayed by the campfire because the place demanded witness. The wall behind Anna still held a patch of wallpaper with a floral border browned by smoke. A bent spoon lay frozen into the courtyard mud. Someone had hung a child's shoe from a nail on the gate, perhaps to dry it, perhaps to keep rats from carrying it off, perhaps for a reason nobody living remembered. These scraps did not enlarge the tragedy. They reduced it to household scale, which was worse. A city can absorb statistics. A courtyard cannot. Ivan understood then why he had picked up the record in the cellar. Not because it was valuable, because in Stalingrad, the smallest intact remnant of ordinary life accused the whole battle more clearly than another pile of dead men. He made Anna repeat the facts once, because accuracy had become cargo. Late afternoon. Riverward end of the lane. Shot from the same general line of housing that watched the Berth approaches. The sniper who ruled the river had ruled this street too. Different griefs, same window. Ivan left a twist of tobacco by her fire because that was all he had that was not already committed elsewhere, then worked his way back through the gate and into the ruins. The return was harder because he now knew exactly what failure meant. Before, he had been chasing a location. Now he carried a father's answer and 11 wounded men behind it. He reached Berth 62 after midnight, limping badly enough that the pain in his foot had become a rhythm of its own. Makarov was still at the berth, writing by shielded lantern. Ivan gave the facts exactly as he had received them. Volzhsky Street 14 was gone. Anna Petrovna remained at the wall. Katya had been shot fetching water, buried, then buried again by collapse. Makarov listened without interruption, then drew a line through the reserved berth in his ledger. He began to write one new name, stopped, crossed it out, and told Ivan to use the place for one of his factory wounded. Bring them before first light. After that, the berth might be rubble or ice. It made no difference which. Then he added one thing bought by too many dead river crews. The sniper in housing block 6 fired by habit. 4 seconds after a flare if the target ran. 7 or 8 if it crawled and gave him time to correct. If Ivan was bringing stretchers, he was to break the movement. False starts, pauses, no repeated spacing. Irritate the eye, make discipline expensive. Ivan took a small drag sledge, 2 rope loops and the released berth, then went back through the dark to the mold shop cellar. Savchenko was awake, chewing coffee grounds. He looked at the torn boot, the ice in Ivan's sleeve, and the record under his coat, then asked whether he had gotten it there. Ivan answered with facts instead of yes or no. Katya was dead. The berth was free. Berth 62, before first light. That was enough. In the cellar, work replaced philosophy at once. Men who could still lift cut blanket strips for bindings and chose who would go. They selected 4 with a chance. Alyosha, the jawless sapper, a machine gunner with a chest wound, and an artillery sergeant with one leg gone above the knee. The others would have to wait for another boat, that nobody could honestly promise. Arithmetic had won again. They lashed 2 wounded at a time to the drag sledge, then took the others by rope loops when the ground tightened. The first stage through the factory ruins was slow but possible because shelling farther south masked some of their noise. The second stage, into Bani Ravine, nearly broke the plan. A sledge loaded with wounded would not slide straight over frozen bodies, shell gutters, and the horse carcass Ivan had crossed alone. He changed the method on the spot. Carry one man by loops while dragging the empty sledge ahead. Go back for the second. It doubled the labor and widened their exposure, but it stopped them from presenting the sniper the same geometry twice. Ivan took the lead every time, because he alone knew where the ravine narrowed, where mud lay under ice, and where a buried corpse could collapse under a boot. The gain was control. The cost was that every decision now depended on one tired man with a torn heel. The first flare caught them beside the dead horse with the machine gunner halfway through the bend. Ivan rolled the man into the shadow under the carcass and flattened himself across the bright bandage on his chest. A shot cracked high, then another. The sniper had seen disturbance, not shape. Good enough. They waited through the rest of the flare and another full minute of darkness. When Ivan lifted his weight, the machine gunner's eyes were open and empty. Savchenko wanted to carry him anyway. Ivan said no at once. A dead man could use no berth, and they had already built the mission on that sentence. They cut the straps, left the body under the horse, and moved on. The gain was time. The cost was not only the body. It was the knowledge that the logic used to send Ivan out now governed which of his own men could be abandoned. By the time they reached the open ground near the berth, no one had strength left for heroics. Ivan forced them into a pattern that looked almost stupid. Pull the empty sledge 10 meters and stop. Wait through a flare. Send one bearer alone with rope. Wait again. Then move Alyosha and only Alyosha while the sniper searched for the larger shape he expected. On the second flare, the first shot took the Labour Battalion man through the arm. On the third, the sniper fired at the empty sledge. That wasted bullet gave Ivan his chance. He dragged Alyosha by the shoulder straps across the last patch of ice and smashed into the retaining wall with the boy's boots, knocking against his own shins. His hands tore open through the gloves. His foot felt as if the hole in the heel had spread into the bone. None of it mattered, while the body kept moving. Makarov and 2 river hands took over from there with the cold efficiency of men who loaded wounded as part of their trade. The artillery sergeant came through next, the jawless sapper last. Savchenko refused the berth when Makarov offered it to him out of rank and common sense. He said the cellar still needed a man who knew where the ammunition was buried. It was a foolish answer, and therefore sincere. For one disloyal second, Ivan looked at the boat and measured his own weight against the angle of the gunwale. He could have argued that a scout was worth more than a half-conscious boy, that he carried route knowledge, that a man who had made this run once might be more useful on the east bank than in a cellar already half buried. All of that may even have been true. None of it mattered. The west bank was full of truths that could not be spent because the available space was too small. He saw Makarov make the same calculation with his eyes and reject it before either of them spoke. The boat was loaded to its proper cruelty. One more body could turn competence into sinking. Ivan stepped back before the temptation could become language. Alyosha opened his eyes while they slid him onto the planks of the boat. Ivan bent close and heard one word. Cold. There was no reply worth giving. He pulled the canvas higher under the boy's chin and stepped back. That was all the comfort available on the west bank. The gain was that Alyosha left alive. The cost was that Ivan remained behind with the unfinished and the unchosen. The boat pushed off under muffled engine. Ice cracked against the bow and spun away downstream. A flare rose and turned the crossing into pure geometry. Black hull, White River, bent men, canvas mounds. A shot from housing block 6 hit water short. Another struck the retaining wall overhead and showered the berth with grit. Then the boat moved beyond the easiest angle and dissolved into darkness. Makarov stood with the mooring rope in his hand until it dragged free. He said the berth was spent and the account closed. No gratitude, no speech. Only closure. Success on the Volga was often nothing more than the failure of one particular disaster to happen. 7 wounded still lay in the cellar. No more room existed on this boat. Another crossing might come. More likely, shellfire or ice would arrive first. Savchenko was already turning back inland, with the man shot through the arm. Ivan went with him because his place had not changed. The war had let him improvise a mission. It had not promoted him out of the cellar. Dawn was beginning to pale the cloud over the river when he limped back through the side bay and down into the mold shop. The observation slit was still half buried. 4 empty places on the floor showed where the chosen wounded had lain. The cellar felt both relieved and more desperate for the difference. Savchenko made his report to nobody higher, because nobody higher could be reached. Then he looked at Ivan and asked the same question in its simplest form. "Did you get it there?" In peacetime, the answer might have been yes or no. In the cellar, the words would not hold. He had reached the address. The woman named on the sleeve was dead. Her father had released the berth. 3 wounded were on the river. 1 had died in the ravine. 7 still waited on the floor. The record had crossed the city and come back. Ivan sat against the wall, took the half-disc from his coat, and brushed dried mud from the broken edge with his thumb. Around him, the cellar resumed its functions. Dressings were changed, notes were scribbled. Overhead, the German guns found their interval again, and the mold shop shook every 17 seconds, as if his errand had only been a pause inserted into a larger machine. Ivan lifted the record to his ear. There was no gramophone, no spindle, no needle, no orchestra left to speak through those grooves. Yet the object had become heavier on the journey than when he found it, and weight demands a hearing. On the next concussion, he tapped the rim lightly with 1 finger. On the next again, 2 soft clicks against shellfire. Not music. Not even memory in any dependable form. Only a man in a ruined factory proving to himself that something made for music had crossed Stalingrad and come back unground into dust. He did not answer Savchenko. After a while, the sergeant stopped waiting and turned back to the wounded. That was all right. Some reports belonged in ledgers, some belonged nowhere. In the lining of Ivan's coat, between the dressing and the oilcloth, there was still half of Swan Lake, the part before the break. It was no longer a delivery. It was evidence. Not that Beauty had survived the battle, nothing so large. Only that before the battle there had been a shelf, a room, a woman who wrote her address in blue pencil, and a city in which a record was something a person could expect to hear to the end.